Welcome everybody. We have got another automation ROI webinar today. This is the second part in our data series. The first part a few weeks back was to really talk about the why and the what from a data health perspective. And now we're going to talk about, and there was a bit of how, wasn't there, Wayne? There was a little bit of how. There's a bit of like hearts and minds and all of that stuff, because often what we find in automation is there's sometimes not enough. I'm really sitting on the fence here. Sometimes not enough time spent getting the business to really buy in to what this technology is going to do for them, not to them. And maybe some of the people on the webinar today or watching later will understand and have been in those shoes where they know what they're trying to achieve, but the business doesn't go, oh, thanks for that. They actually potentially push back. Been in recruitment a while, seen that a lot. So that's what the previous webinar was about. So if you missed that one, don't dial off now, but just be sure to go back and watch it. No different really that if you join Star Wars maybe at episode 4, I was about to say you might go back and watch 1, 2 or 3, but if you're a certain generation, you'll know that's a really silly thing to do, if you know what I'm talking about. But we'll move on, otherwise I could spend all day talking about Star Wars. So welcome everybody to the webinar. Let's rinse through the slides, shall we, Wayne?
Let's go.
Right, lovely. So part 2 of our data series, we are focused and fixated today on speeding through some ideas on what you can actually do to build some automations, to build that data health, and ultimately, would you believe, build some data wealth. Rhymes nicely. Right then, so let's move on to the next slide. So some of you know Wayne and I from a previous life. Some of you haven't met us before. Lucky or unlucky, depending on which side of the fence you sit. But some of you will know that we stand for 3 things in recruitment. Recruitment training, we're really keen to help as many recruiters improve productivity and performance as we can. Bullhorn ROI for me is, don't just buy Bullhorn and hope. Buy Bullhorn and have a strategy and have a plan and have a process for making it work for you. Yeah, don't buy a car and leave it on the drive and go, there's no ROI in that. And then obviously the automation piece. Now we've got another series of webinars about to kick off in ROI and automation. And the series is going to be fixated on generating revenue. Part 1 is coming. Grab your phones, swipe that QR code, get yourselves booked on, please. So yeah, revenue doesn't just come from generating leads. It comes from lots of different parts of your database. We're going to be sharing some ideas. And some of you have already had a battle planning session with Wayne. If you haven't and you would like a free battle planning session with Wayne, where you can tell him all of your ideas that you've got for automation, for good or for bad, and really tap into the thousands of people that he's worked with. We don't call him my chief automator for nothing. Pop the word battle into your chat and I will contact you to book a quick slot with him as well. We've got a number of different things that we're going to be fixated on today. And as we always do on this, we always throw in a Bullhorn first tip, because the one thing we love to do for you automators and leaders is to give you something that you could potentially take back into the office and say to your guys and gals, try this. It'll do you some good with Bullhorn. In my younger days, when I used to mentor operations and marketing people, I'd always give them little tips and tricks that they could take into the office, a bit like cake and chocolate, where everyone's your friend if you're constantly handing that stuff out. And in lieu of that, especially in the remote world that we all work in, nothing better than a Bullhorn tip, is there, Wayne, to start your day? So we're gonna chuck one of those in as well. Okay. Now, again, very quickly, I want to know what word you would use to describe your data, and I want to be I want you to make me laugh today because I've had a busy day. Give me some words or phrases to describe the state of your data right now as it currently stands. And I'm not just talking about the fact that it might be on Bullhorn. Some of you, she hedges her bets, might have data in more than one place. God forbid. Some of you might have had a massive cleanup just before GDPR. Thought you had it sussed. Turns out you probably don't. Some of you might pay for the benefit of accessing data you've already got. Some of you might advertise to get more of the stuff that you've not been cleaning, which for me is a bit like me buying another pair of shoes. Got enough, but funnily enough, just too many to decide which one I want to wear tomorrow. So yeah, Shabbles, Scholacy. I need to look that up. Whoever typed that in, Thanks for giving me some homework there. Older than some consultants. That's not hard these days. That's the shambles, unruly, gives me hemorrhoids. And do you know what? I'm not even going to correct that typo because I know exactly what you mean. And crap. The crap and gives me hemorrhoids. You two people need to get together.
Indeed.
There's some symbiosis there, isn't there? God forbid we should have a bit of a laugh on a data webinar, Wayne.
Indeed.
I'm regularly
Absolutely.
wanting to send out emails about web data being sexy and stuff like that. And I know it just won't get through your spam filters, but I'm going to just do it today because I personally find data incredibly sexy. And I think it's fair to say I'm not on my own. I think that Tesco's Club Card does as well. I think that Google finds your data very sexy. I know that anyone that's read any of the news since Brexit will know that there are businesses out there that make a lot of money out of our data. Don't want to get political today, but interestingly enough, segue in, there's a guy called Dunbar, a cool name, and he says, actually, guys and gals, you got too much of the stuff. There's a limit as to what a human can cope with, and the secret is in the blog that we've written there. So read that up. We've actually won a client recently who read that blog and went, someone who actually helps me understand what I need to do with my data. I want to work with Barclay Jones. Thank you very much. Not that that was like a Jedi mind trick, bringing in the Star Wars reference again, but grab that blog because that will really help you understand potentially that you might have enough. It just might be a bit of a mess. So that's something else to consider. So on to the next slide. Few stats. I always chuck stats in. Why? Maybe you've seen these stats before. Some of you haven't. Some of you need these stats to go back to the workforce and go, guys, gals, we've got to get with the program here. We're taking too long to place our candidates. We're advertising jobs and attracting people who are no good for us. If we actually looked on Bullhorn before we went anywhere else, we'd place them quicker and we'd make a lot more money, maybe have more time off, go to the gym more, eat more cake, in that order. So I want you to be really using these stats, not just as a warm-up, but taking them back into the office to really give you some credibility, if indeed you need some, to basically move the dial and get your teams to really start engaging with your Bullhorn system. Because I don't accept that Bullhorn is expensive. I accept that it's expensive if you don't use it. So that's the key to a lot of these webinars. Because if you don't use Bullhorn enough and you don't use the data that's on there, then you're not really going to get the value from everything else that it can do. Now, I'm not here to kind of brainwash you into loving Bullhorn. You've bought it already, you've made that decision. But I am here to say, don't be crazy and make sure that the only people that make money from your purchase are the people that you bought it from. Use the data, weaponize it, monetize it. Make sure as well, and never has there been more true a statement, by getting engaged with Bullhorn now, automation, AI will slide into position. By not engaging with your Bullhorn data, automation will be hard and AI will not have a chance. And we know, if we know anything about those two A's, that they're here whether we like it or not. If you use them well, you will not roboticize your business. You will humanize it by giving the humans more time to do what they're paid to do, which is not to shuffle data around or to zone out sourcing all day long. So think about that while you're having these chats with Wayne today about your different automations. So that's something else for you to think about. Right. Think about where your data is within your cycle. Again, we've drawn this pretty picture. Snip it out if you need access to, or message me for the slides afterwards. But I want you to be thinking while you're listening to what Wayne's doing with the recruitment life cycle and cleaning up your data. Where in your cycle does your data let you down? Where does it cause the most problems? So for a client that we worked with last year, interestingly enough, it was the job qualification stage. They weren't really managing the data very well at that stage. And funnily enough, those of you that know, if you don't qualify your jobs well and you don't screen your candidates well, the rest of the recruitment life cycle is down to one hell of a long-winded hope as opposed to a strategy. Some of you guys and gals are not particularly brilliant at sorting out your data post-placement. That can cause you some big problems as well. So you may, outside of this webinar, almost like tip number 470 so far in this webinar, start saying to yourself, which part of the cycle would you want to focus your attention on to clean up that element of data, rather than trying to clean it up clean up every single thing. Focusing your attention on the muscles or the areas of the life cycle that's going to do you the most good. That could really help you get this nailed down, because some of you have got some wickedly large databases, and that's not a nice mountain to climb in the current year. I don't think anyone's going to give you any time off to clean your database. You're going to have to do that during the day. Next slide. And this is just something else for you to bear in mind throughout the entire webinar today. This is my dig up stupid model. Some of you may have seen this already, but basically it refers to an episode of The Simpsons that I watched about 1,000,000 years ago, where Homer was told there was some gold in his garden, and he just carried on digging, and he just didn't know where to stop. And in the end, they shone a light, and they just went, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm looking up." He'd gone way past it, and I think the title was something like "Dig Up Stupid." And I grabbed this and thought, this is what happens with recruiters every single day. Rather than fixating on the green area of their database, that yesterday's data, that stuff that's really hot to trot and things that they need to do, they're constantly going outside the database trying to bring more stuff in. Maybe they're also drowning a little bit in the dormant stuff, and the FOMO, oil slick, nasty, dirty area, they're really trapped in that. And as automators and leaders, your job is to get into that black and yellow space and sort it out, to negate the need potentially to go outside the database, and to focus your recruiters on that green area with automation. And that's a lot of what Wayne is going to be talking about as well today. So this is my dig up stupid model.
Cool. So starting thinking about cleansing your database, as Lisa's already mentioned, there's lots of places you can start. The key thing that I find when working with clients is, where do you need to start? Do you understand where your dirty data is getting onto the database? Are you at the start of the journey, at the end of the journey? Is it a particular process that recruiters should be doing? Is automation encouraging dirty data, etc., etc.? So understanding your challenge and building a plan and being able to communicate that plan out to the entire business is one of the considerations that you definitely need to have. As Lisa's mentioned already, you need to focus on specific data sets. The easier that you can break your projects down into digestible chunks, that means then you can start thinking about, right, what automations do we need? That means you can communicate it. That means you can tell your recruiters what you want them to do. I've worked on several projects whereby we've sent lots of data to recruiters and said, can you clean the data? Nothing's happened. You send notifications out, nothing happens. Leadership or managers specifically haven't really been aware of what needed to be done. So on that basis, it's a case of, right, well, we need to communicate and get the whole business engaged with this. Whereas if you break it down, or if you break it down into digestible chunks, you might just say, well, we're going to work on the Manchester data set, or the UK data set, or the Singapore data set, etc., etc. That way you can have a more targeted approach in terms of your data cleansing exercises. We've already mentioned here future data, the dig up stupid model, future, historic and current data. Where should you start? I always say you should start your current data set, then you can think about your future data set, i.e. the data that's coming onto the database. Let's make sure that that doesn't keep adding to your problem of dirty data. Then eventually you can just start looking at the historic data. We talked about this a lot in the previous session, which is standards. You need to make sure you have some standards in place. Historically, those would be mandatory fields. Yeah, and the temptation is to fill up your entire page with lots of mandatory fields. Whereas what automation can do is give the recruiters a bit more flexibility, but we could be checking behind the scenes as to whether or not that data is cleansed. Training, mentioned that already, and whether or not there's the whole journey and lots of automations. This is important. If you've got 600, 700, 800 automations all working together, you have to really think about the journey that's been plugged together. We did one recently whereby we had 17 automations working together. We didn't turn one of them into the priority, the high priority one. We needed that one to run first. So when we did our initial test, the data was all over the place and we couldn't figure out why. As soon as we turned on the high priority, that one ran first, that mapped everything we wanted it to do, and then everything fell into place. So think about your entire journey, use the high priorities. One of the key things you must do, or I think you should be doing, when you're making big changes to data sets, think about using one-time lists. If you're using an always updating list, and let's say your list says the status is, I don't know, active. If If you go through and then change that status to something else in the automation, then your automated or always updating list changes. And therefore, if there was a problem, you've got no way of rolling back. So use one-time lists as your rollback plan. That's a really good business continuity strategy there. Another option that you can use as well is notes. Notes are great because they give you a time and a date stamp, and on top of that you can put a little message in there as to what was updated. That means if you do need to find that data set or you do need to do something, at least you can go and run an advanced note search in Bullhorn. You can pull up that list, turn it into a hot list, and you've got your data back to where it needs to be potentially. As with anything, you should always be thinking about testing before you go live. So make sure your list criteria is either focused around some test data, or do what I do, sometimes just add the surname ends in Y. Yeah, that'll give you a random selection or rough random selection of some data that you can test against. Interestingly, we figured this out recently, and it was an accident. We wanted to update all categories, wanted to replace categories and skills when we were doing this update for a client. What we noticed was you can't overwrite categories and skills when you do updates. So you can only add to, you can't replace, even though there's the option to replace. Tools. There's loads of tools in automation that you can use. I've mentioned some already. Advanced search, go and find the data. Surveys, ask people to update their data. Notifications, remind people to update or cleanse the data. Update the data option, got that one already. Duplicate lists, there's already candidate and sales contact lists out there. I still don't see enough people engaging with those. Dirty and duplicate data is not great, especially when you're uploading data. So if somebody says upload your CV, it's going to go and try and find that record. It won't know which record to associate against if you've got duplicate email addresses. So what it does is that it randomly selects one, it uploads that, which may not be ideal. One-time list I've mentioned, and notes I've mentioned already as well. So data cleansing, lots to think about. That list should give you some ideas and some strategies around the things that are very important to you and where you want to start. Where have I done this before? This is an example of what I did recently for a client. We went away and looked at a specific candidates that had had a pre-screen call. People who have had a pre-screen call, in my mind, we should know a lot of details around that. What we wanted to do is just double check everyone who's had a pre-screen call in the last 14 days, how much data is missing from those fields. So what we did, we created that automation. We then notified the recruiter. Interestingly, what the client did, which I loved, was 3 days after that, if the candidate was still in the journey, well, what we did was automatically request that the candidate go away and update that data for us and check it and validate it for us. So
think about when you're looking to clean your data. Evidently what you're looking to do is clean the stuff that's obviously dirty. What we want to be doing is being really appreciative of dirty data. Might not be what it seems. Okay, you might be able to spot it a mile off, or it might be kind of like lurking in plain sight. One of the things for you to consider, and this will also help you engage the rest of your business on your mission to clean your data, because I could almost do a poll now and there'll be a significant percentage of you who know that there are going to be pockets of interest within your business that want you to leave their data well alone. Or their data isn't even on the system because they don't want you to touch it. It's either here or over there, or God forbid. We came across a client recently whose staff had started using Trello for logging client data. They got Bullhorn. So I want you to be looking at these stats. These are relatively old stats. These are a couple of years old. I personally think they're going to be worse now because of the volumes of stuff that's out there. But not only does it decay regularly, and you can decide in your own sectors what that looks like, if you're temp, perm, contract, the sectors that you operate in, if they're fast paced or they're more traditional, like accountancy and law, things like that. They decay, data decays naturally, but it also hurts pipelines. So even if some of your business like cleanliness because they're clean freaks, or they like making money, there's two stats here that are going to really help you get the business allowing you to touch their data. Because without consistent data entry, you will end up with duplicates, inactive data, old stuff really getting in the way. And again, what we regularly see when we do our Bullhorn ROI projects, where we look at the business, look at the processes, looking at the people and the data, what we regularly see is recruiters do a quick search on Bullhorn. It's a mess. They go, I can't find what I'm looking for. I'll advertise and get more. And then they tip it all on. No consistency in terms of loading and coding. And then the cycle just repeats itself. And then people want to spend money and time on LinkedIn Recruiter and job boards and so on to repeat that insanity cycle. So use those two sets. And Wayne's going to move on to now how you can spot dirty data and what you do about it.
Cool. So, mentioned some of these things already. So spotting dirty data, some of the things that you can be doing with the dirty data, we've already looked at using the advanced search. So looking at dirty data, simple things like spotting sales contacts that have an inactive owner. To me, that's dirty data. So use the advanced search feature to really hone in and drive looking at the data sets that you want to play around with. Once you've understood the data set, then you build your list, and then you already know what your journey should be, whether it's going to be an outreach or whether it's going to be a notification to your recruiters, or a mixture of both. So duplicates, there is a duplicate list already. There's some really good things you can do with duplicates, such as just cleanse a very, very old data within the duplicates. So one of the first things I do, any data that's over 5 years old that has got no activity against it, generally we can archive that data off. If there's a more up-to-date record, well, that up-to-date record will already be being used. That will get rid of probably a lot of those duplicates straight away. Old inactive data, you've got the notes, you've got activities around when it's last updated, etc., etc. Those are really good ways of being able to identify data. I think I've mentioned this before in previous webinars. I've got one client, we found 20 records that were created in 1988 of candidates, and it was like, why have we still got this data in there? Hadn't been touched for like 30 years old, etc. Obviously it'd been migrated, but we finally took the decision to archive that off. You'll be pleased to hear. Spotting dirty data, some other things that you need to do in terms of when you're building out your journeys, when you've spotted dirty data. Some of those, if we're looking at current data sets as an example, and we've just maybe pre-screened a candidate, the temptation is to immediately just send a notification to the recruiter saying, oh, you've missed some data. You need to give them some time. So adding in a wait step at the start of the journey, maybe 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, that will allow the recruiter to go away and update the data. They may be waiting on something. Yeah, so don't chase your recruiters immediately, but you can give them a bit of time. And if it's still in that journey, then you can notify them. That's a good thing to do. Some of the other things that is a common problem is people don't understand what the standards are. Yeah, you've got to communicate this across the team. You've got to communicate this across the business. And this is why you want to do it in digestible chunks. Candidates at pre-screen or interview level, this is what we want. When I place a candidate, this is what we want. So you can do that in phases. Don't try and eat the elephant, as we say. You can send notifications, but your recruiters may not necessarily be engaging with those notifications. So management have to be on board with this project. They're the ones who ultimately have to be responsible for making sure these things get done. There's a saying, isn't there, Lisa? Management is doing things right and leadership is doing the right things. So you have to take that mentality when you're doing data cleansing projects as well. You have to get management involved. Validating data is a really good one to do. I've already mentioned candidate sales contact. You know, if you've got a sales contact and you've got a job on with that sales contact, I would expect the following fields, these are my standards, to be completed. Same with a job. One of my clients, several clients actually now we've done this for, when you take a job on, a job brief is sent back to the candidate, to the sales contact, saying, I understood this is the role, and therefore we merge a lot of the data from the job into an email that we send forward on to the sales contact. I like that because it forces the recruiter to really think about what data they're inputting, because they know that's going to go back to the client to sign off and check. Placement is the area whereby we find the biggest challenges. Maybe not, maybe candidates, but placements cause the biggest long-term problems. If you get your placement data incorrect, that has a knock-on effect in terms of invoicing and payroll and timesheets if you're a contract or temp business. Getting placements checked and validated, I think, is really, really important. That's it. I'm going to cover off from spotting dirty data. So where have we done this for? This is the example of what we did previously. Bad example here. I didn't put my wait step at the start, just up here. This is where it should be. But then we send a notification. We wait a few days. If we still haven't got that data, then we're emailing the candidate in this instance to ask them to check and update their data. If they haven't clicked on the link, we're doing it again, and therefore followed a process all the way down to the point whereby we didn't hear back from the recruiter or the candidate. On that basis, we made them inactive from a status perspective. Okay, building transparent and accurate pipelines. Lisa, what have you got to say about this?
So again, a pipeline isn't absolute chaos, she says. Wouldn't that be lovely if she was so right? But obviously what we certainly see when we do a lot of the work around building and coaching, where it comes either recruiters using Bullhorn more effectively or automation creating space for them to use it more effectively. Again, fixate on what a good pipeline actually looks like. Where in the cycle does data really need to be at its strongest? And what could you do to automate those bits of the process? No different really to, as automators and leaders, how could you run ahead in the life cycle of a candidate and client and colleague, i.e. consultant, and smooth the way with clean data sets to make their lives as easy as possible? You know, I always say that the minute you finish writing the plan for lead generation and automation, and evidently your goal is to go out there and generate more leads and revenue generating opportunities for your recruiters, don't stop there. Start thinking about the candidate pipeline, because that's very swiftly going to follow. Generating loads of job revenue leads for your recruiters with an incredibly dirty Bullhorn candidate database is reputation destroying, and also it allows you to remain hooked on the crack that is LinkedIn job adverts and Indeed. So look at that life cycle. Yours may be simpler, yours may be more complex, and just think about, while Wayne's talking about this, creating that speed and that accuracy to allow recruiters to really lean into the process and get there quick. Because we know for some of our sectors, as much as we would prefer it not to be judged on speed, sometimes that's what your clients want, is first past the post rather than the most perfect candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of jobs pipeline, the thing that I always harp back to when I was a recruiter, there were a lot of busy recruiters working on jobs that were irrelevant, i.e. they were speculative jobs, or they were working on jobs that they were people that we knew little about, whereas they had jobs from clients who whereby we'd made multiple placements. They were festering. So the jobs pipeline and making sure it's accurate and up to date, I think, is really, really important. Now, if you've got Bullhorn Analytics or any other dashboarding tool, analytics tool, looking at live jobs where the job is open, yeah, that's the field that most people don't update, open, close, or where the status is accepting candidates. If that is not kept up to date, then your jobs pipeline and those analytics looks overinflated. Yeah, leadership could be sat there going, oh, look, we've got £15 million worth of jobs that we're actively working. How wonderful. Yeah, based on our projections at 20%, therefore we can expect £3-4 million over the next month. Well, actually, there's only about £1 million worth of live jobs that people are working at any one time. So keeping your jobs up to date and keeping them refreshed, helps management take their leadership decisions, but it helps your recruiters as well make sure that they're working on the right information or right jobs. So some considerations here. One of my clients really stopped this process because there was one job that was almost missed out of hundreds that was going to be closed by the rules that we put in place. And what you have to work to, what's the typical life cycle of a job? How long does it typically stay open for? Build in some flexibility into that. So if the job typically stays open for a couple of days because you're a temp business, maybe say anything over 7 days. Yeah, it can be closed. If you're a perm business and your your life cycle is maybe a couple of months, then maybe give it 3 or 4 months. If you're an exec business and you've got to have 20 million interviews, then maybe do it, maybe it's 6 or 12 months, whatever that time frame is. But make sure you put that in place and then just stick to it and monitor it. If you get the odd one that comes in and out that causes a challenge, then just accept that. That's the exception, it's not the norm. So that's what I was trying to say. Work to the norm, not the exceptions. Another big area as well is inactive owner data. When somebody leaves your business, what are you doing with those jobs? Now, I see most of the time, nothing. They just sit there, they fester. Nobody takes ownership of those. Nobody takes ownership of the job. So that means nobody takes ownership of those sales contacts. Nobody's taking ownership of those relationships that somebody else has built, that your company has now got a relationship with, but now it's just sat there festering and allowing your competitors or even the person that's left the business to take over that relationship and that potential business away from you. Use the reports to field. If you haven't got the reports to field updated in Bullhorn user records so far, go and do it, because it's a really quick way of escalating. Here's a list of jobs that are not owned by anybody, yeah, that were opened in the last month. Can you please reassign it to your relevant recruiters? That's what the reports to field is there for. 5 years. What does 5 years mean? Well, 5 years is currently the default number of years that the Bullhorn synchronizes between Bullhorn and Bullhorn automation. We had it recently. We couldn't understand why pre-2018 data was just not cleansing itself. You know, we had stuff going back to 2008 up to 2018. It was because it wasn't synchronized. You can request to Bullhorn to go away and synchronize that data, or when you look at the Bullhorn 1-minute tip later on, you can do that update within Bullhorn if you have permissions very quickly. So automations, again, things you can be doing here, that relates down to notifying inactive owners. I've mentioned that, closing inactive jobs. That's the classic one that most people will have switched on. Open, closes, statuses, whatever that combination is, you go away, you just update the job to closed and obviously change the status to whatever it would be, closed and lost. Here's an example of the inactive owner one that we did recently. We started this and we had over something like 12,500 jobs. So I've written it down there, 12,500 open jobs from inactive owners. We updated it. We ran a campaign. We messaged recruiters and said, go and reassign these. We identified the specific categories and industries, distributed that to the reports to managers. They then spent time going through those lists and reassigning that data to their own recruiters. Yeah, and then it was up to the recruiters to go away and contact those those sales contacts, find out what happened about those jobs. Ironically, that process generated something like 100 jobs that they picked up. Yeah, so closing jobs and re-engaging people. We used to do it, didn't we, Lisa, when we had our greens, and we'd look at all of our old greens and say, well, we didn't place that one years ago. Then we go and found that candidate. It's all within Bullhorn now. You should have all of that data available to you. Okay. Keeping recruiters focused on live jobs, Lisa, what can you say about that?
So again, it's that figuring out which bit of your database you want to ring fence for recruiters and allow them to really focus on that. I think, you know, again, you may have this in your business already, or maybe you've recently started attacking it, but if they're everywhere, if they're doing everything everywhere all at once, name that movie, they'll get nowhere. And we obviously know that a lot of you are really struggling to get your recruiters fixated and focused on pipeline. They could be very busy doing lots of admin. They can be very efficient doing lots of admin, but they're not necessarily picking up the phone. Or maybe they're trying to call the wrong people at the wrong time. So again, it's really fixating and saying, which parts of the database do you want them focused on? Make it as easy as you can for them to get inside that bit of the database and stay there, as opposed to allowing them to spread themselves so thinly that they don't get anything done, or they're working the wrong candidates with the wrong jobs. So really think about that. Wayne, what kinds of automations do you think we could be switching on for that kind of behavior shift?
So the classic ones are clearly just reminding recruiters to close down their jobs. Yeah, if recruiters have got too many open jobs, and managers should be able to spot that. You can obviously look at each other's data within Bullhorn. So pulling up a list of all of the live jobs, looking at the job view, the job list view, and then filtering on individual recruiters, that will give you an indication as to whether or not people have got jobs that they shouldn't have open. Looking at client jobs not being filled. you've got clients with jobs, but you're not working them. That's madness. That's how to really annoy your client and degrade the relationship rather than wow them with the relationship. The other common problem that we spot is speculative jobs. So you add in live jobs and just leave them open indefinitely. But you should ideally have some form of status or some form of field that indicates this is a continuously open job. Speculative jobs can also be those internal jobs. A lot of recruiters have internal jobs for their own internal recruitment processes. Again, you need to differentiate what those are. So making sure you've got some fields available to help you differentiate what's a client and what's an internal and what's speculative. Jobs, automations, yeah, jobs, no shortlists. This is a great way of basically managing your jobs. It's all very well having jobs and creating a jobs pipeline, but you also need to work the job. So there's some really cool features within automation there that says things like you can look up jobs that don't have a shortlist. So I remember a client saying that when they worked with a bank, they had 48 hours in which they got the job and they had to submit CVs within 48 hours. So we built an automation that said if there's any job that's been added within the last 24 hours and there's no shortlists, which is now a feature, you can basically notify the recruiter. Or you could even say jobs with only less than, if there's less than 5 shortlists, then notify the recruiter. Lots of things that you can do to try and help recruiters stay focused on the jobs that they need to look at. I've mentioned inactive owners. There is a couple of clients that use grading to help the recruiters. I was speaking to a long-term client yesterday about this as well. Classic one is ABC. You may have some killer questions in there, which gives you a grade A1 or A10 down to C1, which would indicate rubbish up to we should really be working on these. You can get automation to auto grade. You could basically say, if there's this or that within the database, if it's a known client that we've had multiple placements with previously, auto grade it as a grade A. That's a really obvious thing. The most important thing is that, again, as with anything, your standards, what does ABC mean? When and how should it be changed? How is a recruiter making that definition? Or, as I've suggested, you could try and get automation to do that for you. This is a job focused. This is an automation that I mentioned a second ago, whereby we're lacking focus and activity. There's not enough information and not enough shortlists going in against this. So this is the bit down here that's really interesting. Job number of, and it says submissions. Here I've said if there's less than 3 submissions, I want to know about it. Yeah, one of our old clients, they used to know that for every 18 CVs they submitted, they eventually got down to 8. Yeah, they would get 1 interview. So they now knew that they had to submit at least 24 CVs in order to get that, and then they extrapolated that out. It worked out to be something like they needed to shortlist almost 100 candidates to every single job in order to make a placement, 100 to 1. But that was the science that they had behind that logic. They worked it all out. It was ingrained into the recruiters. You must get 3 interviews. In order to get 3 interviews, you must submit at least 20, 24 CVs, etc., etc. So again, having that level of information, automation can help you specify and tell recruiters when they're more likely to not make a placement, when they're not working towards the standards or the grades that they need to work towards.
I think something else to think about as well is, again, some of the objections, and there's almost a blog in this way, and I kind of feel about the objections that we regularly hear when we're doing our automation coaching and building and strategy sessions with clients, is some of the objections are around recruiters receiving too many notifications, or they're becoming a little bit fatigued with the system giving them instructions, God forbid. And I look at this and I think, well, that might just be because you've got too many switched on, or it might be that you've got the wrong one switched on. And I'm a big fan of, we had a client recently where they were struggling with the changes that they were trying to make to the business, and the leaders knew what they were trying to do, but it just wasn't being articulated for whatever reason effectively enough to the workforce. So we said, well, just switch tack, turn on some notifications that are actually going to help the recruiters, and they want them, if that makes sense, and then get them bought into the way that this system works. And if you're really good with automation, you're not just going to switch it on and then in a few months' time think about it again. You're going to be treating it like it's the breath and the DNA of the business, and you're going to be regularly thinking about how can it fix my problems for me, and don't ignore it. And what that means is you might have a notification on for 1 month, and the business becomes quite boring about that concept, that cultural shift that you want to make. And what I mean by that is it's everything, it's everywhere, it just becomes the norm, it becomes embedded. And then once you've got that habit nailed down, just turn the notification off and move on. It's I remembered this the other week because we've got a 13-year-old learning the piano, right? And his piano teacher is really good. What he basically says is he just needs to learn it so he can play it through once, and then he just moves on. He moves on to the next piece, because what he's not looking for is perfection. He's looking for good enough. And that might be all you need to be thinking about, ladies and gents, about your teams and how you want them to create that focus. Is once the oil tanker starts to shift, it takes on its own velocity and its own dynamic, and then you move on to the next problem that you want to solve. But you might need to give them the focus in the areas that are going to help them personally figure out what that is, and then be very cunning with the other automations that you want to switch on. That might be the way you turn that oil tank around. So be thinking about as well the effort, the return on effort that is we see not enough return on effort in businesses. I don't see enough scrutiny over how recruiters spend their time. They don't have timesheets. I've always said that this for me is a real issue. I think recruiters need to have their time measured so we can see where they're being inefficient, or in the very least attack the areas that you can see is where the time and money is being wasted, and think about where the data might be missing in your life cycle that might then have a knock-on impact of them going elsewhere, sourcing through LinkedIn, writing adverts. No one gets out of bed in the morning to write an advert. That's like a sadist would do that. Equally, not searching well enough in Bullhorn because they've not had the training, maybe because they lost trust in the data earlier on and you're on a mission to turn that around, but ultimately starting to prove the volume of people that you place through Bullhorn isn't where it needs to be. And if it's currently only 10% of your placements on Bullhorn, then get it to 15% next month. Get it to 20% the month after, and it will start to take on its own velocity if you start pushing it in the right direction. So Wayne, talk to us about placement data and updating and how automation can really take the strain and do a bit of return on effort for these lovely recruiters.
Placements, I think, is probably one of the most important data sets you can get right. One, as I've mentioned previously, it can have significant knock-on effects further down the line. I always remember the client, and they didn't use Bullhorn, obviously, because they had this problem, but they had nearly 1,000 timesheets, and every single Monday morning there was about a 90% error rate with the timesheets. So the 15 recruiters or the 15 finance people came in a Monday morning, no info other, all day they would just be trying to chase candidates and sales contacts to get the timesheet updated correctly. When we analysed why it was always out of date or incorrect, what we traced it back to was recruiters not inputting the information into the job correctly and not keeping that updated, which then meant when they made the placement record, some information was copied across. The other bits and pieces of the placement record, they weren't really filling in, or if they were, it was TBC, to be confirmed, and therefore that got all pushed further down the line. So the idea of making sure that your placement record is spot on will have significant impacts, as I've suggested already. So what can you do about making placement data? Well, you've probably already done something like this already. You've probably already got, if you use the onboard onboard and engage in your hires journey, what you can be doing here is automatically just saying copy the data from the job to the candidate over to the placement, if you've got that in place. What you do need to make sure, though, is that your candidate and your job data is accurate. There's no point you copying rubbish from one field in one entity across into the other entity. Other things you can be doing around this as well is validating the fields. There is information in those fields. So, for example, the billing contact, is that been pulled across? Is there information in that field? If not, you can automatically send the placement back to the recruiter and say, you're missing some key fields. Can you please go back and fill it in? That way it stops it going through to finance, them huffing and puffing, or whoever does credit invoicing. And then basically it stops them from having to be interrupted in their job. So send it back to the recruiter. So validate, update the data. Copy the information from other parts of the database across, and make sure that you validate the information prior to you actually sort of sending it on to the finance team if they need to raise invoices. So 1 minute tip. 1 minute tip, how you can clean your data quickly and accurately. This is something I didn't know was there because it wasn't switched on in my Bullhorn system. So some of you may have this either because it's been switched on already. Some of you may not have this because you weren't aware it was there, but this is also very important. It's a permissions thing as well. So it's probably set at an admin level. Some people, some administrators of Bullhorn do give their recruiters access to this as well. You have to be careful because you will allow your recruiters to update the data fully. Let's just go and have a quick look. So here I've got a list of data. I've highlighted the data. I've got the selection up here. I'm just going to pause it there. Just come back. And what we have here is this drop down under the 6 selected. You've got a number of bulk update options within this. You can update skills, categories, the source. You can update the status as well. If you want to allow your recruiters or you want some high level individuals to be able to update and bulk update some data, then allow them to have this. This is a user permission. So you might need to go and speak to Bullhorn support and request that they can open up these to allow you to do that. Once you've selected it, in this case, we're updating the status. We're saying all these people are registered. It's that simple. You can bulk update. It's limited within Bullhorn, but you can do some bulk updating in Bullhorn as required. Okay. So to summarize, we talked a lot about data, talked a lot about how you can build a strategy, how you can identify what it is you should be doing. So first and foremost, if you're thinking about this, go and identify where you've got issues. Where are the challenges? Identify why you've got challenges. Is it a user or a problem between the chair and the keyboard? Yeah, or alternatively, is there some data that's just being copied across incorrectly, or is it just that people don't understand what data needs to be uploaded? Use the hints and tips, the defaults that are available within Bullhorn. So if you've got a particular field like the grading field, ABC, you can put the hint or the tip or the description within that field to remind people what it should be there for. Train your recruiters whilst they're on the job. 70% of people's learning is done whilst they're doing their role. So help them by using those fields. Make sure that you agree the standards and make sure that those standards are agreed across the business and everyone understands it. And again, do it in chunks. Don't try and do everything all at once. People will get confused. They won't remember. You need to train your recruiters. You need to train your managers. You can then go away and start building the automations, releasing that automation. Something I come up a lot is releasing lots of automations and then not monitoring and tracking whether or not they're working. It's better to have 3 automations that's used 100% than 100 automations that's used by 3%. You know, you'll have more value if you have less automations but everyone's engaging with them. So track engagement, allow managers to manage, allow leaders to lead, share that information by using the reports to field. Yeah, and then track the improvement. You want to be able to sell positive stories about this team did X. These are the benefits of what they got from it. Yeah, if you can track that and you can get some feedback, then you can publish that. That will help change the culture of your business. It'll help change behaviors across your business as well.
Don't forget, we obviously have free trials for Recruitment Hit, because as much as you can automate a crazy amount, the humans are still in the room and they are still central to the process. They need to be on the phones more and really weaponizing their systems. And we've got lots of fans who love our Recruitment Hit platform. It's great for onboarding new starters and really good for refreshing experienced users as well. If you're really keen, though, to strategize this year and stand back from the coalface and look at what Bullhorn is doing for you as a system, understand where it sits within your recruitment business, understand where it might not be working, and you want a diagnostic, looking at your people, your data, your processes and your systems, and understand why you're not Bullhorn first, and very importantly, what you need to do to get there. We're really good at that, and we have a vision project that we could implement for you. And then obviously, when it comes to automation, we do a lot of work either coaching to inspire, we do coaching to train people to actually build automations for themselves, or if you're time starved and you don't want to learn because you've got too much other stuff going on, you know, a bit like your clients just want you to do their recruitment for them because they want to run their businesses. Well, we do a lot of automation build work as well. So I'll be in touch with you to let you know how that works. Have a great rest of week, everyone. Don't forget to access our website for future webinars and tips, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Take care.
Bye.